Welcome to the Vibrant Life podcast. This is the official podcast of the Vibrant Life community. I'm Sarah Nolan, and I'm here today with Jeff Leiken, who is the creator of Evolution Mentoring, where he empowers youth to lead extraordinary lives. He's worked with over 30,000 people to help teens answer this fundamental question: what does it take to thrive in this world in this time? He's worked with over 30,000 He's worked with clients in 17 countries across 4 continents. And Jeff is a TED Talk speaker. He's spoken at Stanford, and he's the author of the book, Adolescence is Not a Disease. So Jeff, thank you so much for being here today. I'm super excited to have you on our show today. And can you start off by sharing with us how you got started in this line of work with mentoring teens?
Absolutely. So my own thing with this started really with kind of a very simple, harmless decision my parents made when I was 9 years old, which was to send me away to summer camp. Mm-hmm. And there was experience I had over my summers in this magical place up in northern Wisconsin, where there were some of the summer camp staff who I, as a kid, really looked up to. And especially when I was a teenager, were guys that I would get advice from, or they could give me encouragement or criticism, and things that like somebody else might say to me that I would reject, but coming from them, I would accept it. And as the years went on, and eventually I got to be in that position myself, I began to see this phenomena, Sarah, again and again, where there's a lot of times where parents can offer the right words, but they're the wrong source. Mm-hmm. And where when you're an adolescent, oftentimes you're inclined to turn to friends for advice, but friends don't really have any more life experience than you do. So where do you then go to get help? Where do you get advice? And I put these things together and I realized like there's this incredible value and need to have an adult who's older, wiser, doesn't have the emotional attachment that parents have, has expertise in the stage of life and the terrain and the world that you're living in to be available. And long story short, I just began offering this, putting this out into the world, started in 1997, and it just took a life of its own. Have traveled at this point 2.5 million miles around the world, in countries all over the world, working with teenagers, working with professionals who work with youth, from education to summer camps to after school programs to parent groups. I'm actually doing a talk with a group of parents this evening here locally where I live in California. And then the opportunity to work with high school and college, and in recent years, people into their 20s, really helping them to put these pieces together in their life so that they can go out and really have awesome lives for themselves.
Beautiful. And, this is one of those timeless things where kids are always going to need something like this, especially, you must have seen some kind of a change between 1997 and today with social media and just the way the world is right now. Have you seen much of a change there, and what kinds of changes have you seen?
So, one thing that I have to kind of, put out there is that in the 90s, when I was working initially after graduate school, and I was working in the schools in the public school district, I was working with a lot of the more at-risk youth, a lot of the more, urban minority youth, and developing this, this view of the world, which was really profound. It was this reality that the way that I grew up, the way that I saw the world, the things that were useful and helpful for me to navigate through the world is a different skill set than people who are growing up in like a different background needed to learn. And so the question was always there about how do I become helpful to them? Okay, so I'm saying that because by the late 1990s, when I started doing this as a private practice, I was getting much more of your upper middle class, and sometimes even on the, the higher end, family net worth kind of situation. So I was getting a lot more of these kids who were growing up with the pressure to do really well academically, where their sense of their self-worth was measured ultimately by the name of the college on their sweatshirt that they were wearing. But as the 2000s went on and turned into the 2010s or so, it also started to become measured by not just how many followers they had on social media, but how many likes they would get per post and what, ratio of your followers would, I mean, I could tell you just crazy stories about this stuff, but in the last 10 years or so, there has been this just quantum leap in anxiety around the sense of scarcity of opportunity. And it's coupled with this paradigm that many of these kids that I'm currently working a lot with fall into, which is that success, and both monetarily and socially, so their personal and professional life success, is really only going to go to those who are at the very high end, the top 1%, the top 3% or something, which is equated to where you go to college, to what your career is, to how much money you earn. And because they have such a level of concern about achieving at that level, there's a lot of sense of living in survival mode, right? So when you have a sense of a scarcity of opportunity, right, then you feel like everybody around you is in competition, and you can easily fall into letting like a little thing start to feel like it's a big thing. And I have many parents who I've interacted with who have that same kind of default at this point. Whether they themselves, were that kid, or whether they are just surrounded by so many people who keep telling them how important the grades and the test scores and this stuff is, and then they begin to just fall into it themselves, whatever. But so I would say, long-winded answer is that the most common, sort of the biggest trend that I've seen is that there's this level of stress that I used to see in inner city kids who are literally worried about their survival, transferring over to kids who really have no reason to worry about their survival, but they have this anxiety that builds because they worry that there's not going to be a future for them unless they are uber high achievers and that stuff. And what it leads to is not just being self-focused, because many adolescents tend to be self-focused. There's questions that are going on in their brain at this age, but it leads to almost a self-obsession also, right? So it's like a double trap to be unhappy and and have a hard time being at peace on the inside. But I would say that's probably the biggest trend shift, is just this worry about will there be a life for me, and will I be okay out there unless I'm at the super high end, right?
Yeah, and I can imagine things are changing so fast, and it's so easy to access media. When I was a teenager, I never watched the news. I never really exposed myself to media, but I feel like with social media, the news is everywhere because people are sharing it. Do you think that has something to do with it, where they just are more aware of how fast things are changing, like college is changing and the workforce is changing and things like that? Or have you seen any of that?
For people who are inclined to follow those trends, yes, it influences, right? I think there's certain things about adolescence, and that's the demographic I work with primarily. So maybe parents are more in that category you're talking about than adolescents. Adolescents are still pretty much in the same kind of boat in terms of like what they focus on, what they get distracted by. And so the influence is there, right? Again, like, I grew up in Peoria, Illinois. I think you grew up in New Hampshire, right? We went to school, and then you'd come home, and I had like my neighborhood friends and whatever, and you could tune it out. My point is, school would end and you wouldn't see people again until the next day. Now, yes, it never ends. You're,
right,
on your way home, and there's new updates to your social life and at night and that stuff. But the focus of adolescence in general, younger teen adolescents, it tends to be around their social world, their social status. Where do I fit in the social world? The underlying question is, am I cool enough? Am I desirable enough? Am I whatever? And then as they get to be around 16, 17 years old, the question evolves into, who am I? What do I want from my life, right? And I think that's pretty timeless. But the volume of sources and people out there influencing them is quantum higher. So I agree with you completely on that. And that can be a real obstacle.
So what do people do about that? I mean, I'm speak with a lot of parents myself, and I hear a lot of people just terrified of social media with their kids. They restrict it. It's like seems like some people restrict it, and then some people just kind of ignore it and allow their kids to make the decision. So, what do you see working, and what do you help these kids with, to navigate this?
Well, to be afraid of it at one level is responsible, and at another level it's unnecessary.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, you know, one day your children are going to grow up and they're going to drive a car, and you don't let them have the keys when they're 10 years old. There was a story here in California the other day about some 5-year old who got pulled over the side of the road driving a car. If you saw that story, um, but the thing is how do you, to me, the question becomes, how do you prepare your kids so that by the time they're at an age where they're going to have access to this kind of stuff, that they do it in a way that keeps them safe and is responsible, and they don't allow too many idiots out there to have too much influence over their lives, right?
Yeah.
So, an 11-year-old, do they need Instagram and TikTok? And I would say no. I think it's a really bad starting point, but to prepare them so that by 16 years old, they can handle that stuff, to me, is part of our responsibility as parents.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, what, say, you're working with some kids who are in that world, and, there's the stress and that anxiety that goes along with it. I think, let's see, when I was about 12 is when AOL Instant Messenger was started getting really big, and my parents had no clue, so I was just like constantly, and it was kind of bad. There was no monitoring.
Mm.
If I don't know if it was as bad as today or whatever, but it was pretty bad, and it caused a lot of problems in my life. And I'm curious, when you see kids who are going through stuff like that, where there's that pressure, and for me, it's like I was talking with these people unfacilitated, without any guidance, without any adults there, which as a kid, everything you do, there's adults there to kind of monitor things and make sure things are safe. But when you're, with internet and social media and stuff like that, there are no adults there. So, um, how do you help these kids who are just immersed in this life of, where the socialization doesn't ever stop, and they're feeling that pressure and that overwhelm of, their image and things like that?
Well, there's kind of two questions in what you just said. One of them, at least the way I'm hearing it, Sarah, is, as a parent, what decisions do I make to keep my kids safe, prepare them for this kind of stuff? And then the other piece of this is, how do I raise my child so that, when somebody comes along, whether it's on social media or in the hallway at school, and makes a comment about their body, or, mocks them, or, tempts them or whatever, that my kid can kind of recognize right away, like, oh, you're just a jerk, right?
Mm-hmm.
And not take stuff in and make it personal when it's not, and to me, the answer to the second question is not just about social media. It's about the whole journey of like growing up, right? And it's the 10,000 things that we say and do influencing them growing up to start to really teach them, how do you recognize, what people's intention are? How do you recognize when people are offering you something that actually has value, or when it should be rejected, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's a pacing element to it, which is, at 7 years old, most of the time, I just model not responding or not reacting or not, putting attention on it, because a 7-year-old's only going to notice what you put attention on. It's how it, how it always works, right? I have a 7-year-old, my younger daughter is 7 right now. And, her latest thing that she's obsessed with is learning about policemen and jails and, bad guys and cops, whatever, because there was an incident that happened recently, and there was, trucks, sirens, and all this kind of stuff. Everyone was talking about it, whatever. So now, of course, that's what she's fascinated by, right?
Mm-hmm.
Had we instead gone on a walk and talked about the neighbor's plum tree and, oh my gosh, the plums that are blooming, all this stuff, then we'd be fascinated about plum trees, right? So we want to be very careful as parents, when our kids are young, what we're emphasizing. But as they get older, like my older one right now is a teenager. There's many, many times when, an incident will happen during the day and I'll bring it up over dinner, or we'll be in the car and I'll talk about something, something happened or something at the store or somebody did something. And I talk about, like, this is what went through my head in the moment. This is what I wanted to say. This is what I chose to say, I'll make comments about some of the behaviors of other people around us, and just really pointing out an example of this is that recently she went on a hike with some friends, and it was a social distancing kind of hike where, the kids are all very clear about not, because we're recording this in the midst of this thing. And she didn't get the message that she was supposed to bring lunch with her. And one of the girls shared some food with her. The other two wouldn't share any food with her, right? And these are all 13, almost 14-year-olds, okay? And after the end of the day, I talked to them. I go, listen, it's my mistake. I didn't know you were supposed to bring lunch to it. But what did you think about the fact that girls wouldn't share lunch with you? What would have been the big deal with that? And I talked to her about, making sure that, if you're ever in that situation, like you came home and the first thing you did was talk about how these kids wouldn't share with you. Don't be that kid,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so it's that kind of stuff that we just, talk about endlessly, right? And I think it's in large part, parents have a lot of influence still, even though they don't maybe not see it so clearly when their kids are, in the preteen to teenage years. But we should still be having those conversations, still pointing that stuff out, right? And, in that example of the, like, don't be that kid, it goes right into the basic, insecurity of a teenager, right? It's like, you don't want to be that one other people are talking about. I'm just going to use that to my advantage right now. Like, you want to be that one that, when you come home, they're talking about you were the one who shared, not the two who didn't, right?
Right.
Right.
Yeah. So, when you're talking about distinguishing and helping them distinguish between, like, are they just being a jerk, or should you actually listen to that? Geez, I can just think how helpful that one statement would have been. I'm getting kind of flashbacks about experience that I've had. And it's like, if I would have just understood that, like, oh, they're just being a jerk, like what they said doesn't even matter. And going through those, I really feel like that teaches introspection to go through those conversations and to help them to be more aware of what their feelings are and where they're coming from, and really gain a sense of reality about the situation versus just that pure emotional reaction. So it's so powerful.
Yeah. So, in the work that I do, okay, so I think it's be helpful to sort of frame what it is that I do.
Mm-hmm.
Because I spoke about it, like the history of how it evolved, but there's a distinction in the model of what I do. And the distinction is that I start from the premise that every teenager, and the kids I work with are on the young end, sometimes 14 years old, up to about 26, 27 years old, mostly high school, college students, and the vast majority are high school, college. So 16 to about 22.
Mm-hmm.
And I start from the premise that there's nothing wrong with them. So I don't care what a parent's calling me about. They've lost their motivation for school. They're not hanging out with people anymore. They want to sleep all day. The people that they're hanging out with, I don't like, whatever it is. Now they're talking about dropping out of school. Now she wants to transfer. Now she's having an anxiety attack. The breakup happened. Whatever, it goes on. I go, there's nothing wrong. And what's happening is life is complex. And you're not mature enough yet, and you don't have the skills or the perspective yet to be able to handle this kind of a thing that's going on. And so the question becomes, what perspective, what skills, what tools what guidance do they need so they develop the maturity so they can handle these things, right? So I'm framing all this because the contrast is the predominant model in our world right now is the model of pathologizing, right? It's like trying to come up with a label so that we can come up with a treatment plan and then we can implement the treatment. And the difference when you're a teenager is the difference between going, let's say, to a psychotherapist for whom you're their patient, right? And you go into this doctor-patient thing versus work with me and I'm their mentor, but they're my client, right? And I view, growing up doesn't just happen between, 9 and 5, right? So for me, being able to take a text message at 10 o'clock at night or, on a Saturday or whatever it is, to be available and that stuff, right? So I frame all this because the way that I address this kind of stuff with them is that as they're developmentally ready for this stuff, to be able to handle this kind of complexity of thinking, I begin to really help them realize that there's these decisions that they have to make in their life. And up until now, the decisions have pretty much been made for them, either because someone told them this or because the world around them was doing this, right? So in the example that you and I were just talking about, one of these would be whose approval matters to you and why, and whose opinions matter to you and why, right? Because to go to a teenager, it'd be the same as me saying this to you, like, who cares what anyone thinks about you? You go, well, in principle, it sounds great. And I have moments where I don't really care, but the reality is you do care. You care about how your husband thinks about you, how your kids think about you. You care, there's people in your life. And there's also people whose approval matters to you because it's the benchmarks for you of knowing that you're on the right path, right? So I talk this through, and this is usually somewhere around 15 years old or so where somebody can really start to get this. Sometimes I'll get a 13-year-old who's more mature who can start to get this, right? But, I talk to them about, when you're, getting, whatever it is, dressed for whatever the event is, right? And you come and ask me, how do I look? Seriously? Like, I said this to my daughter, like, you're asking dad? Like, look at how I dress. I don't know this stuff, right? And so if you want to know, how does that look given the thing you're going to, you should go talk to people who know how people dress to go to that kind of a thing, right? That's, but at the same time, there's other things in life where you should be coming to me because my opinion is going to matter a great deal. I know way more than other people do, right? But you have to start to discern that kind of thing in your life, right? And it's the same thing about approval. If you decide, well, I want to get the approval of the popular kids, what it tells me is you want to be popular. And, the next question I would ask you is, how much are you willing to compromise? Because what if what it takes to get the approval of them is not something that you really, want to do, right? If on the other hand you go, I'd like to behave in a way that I get the approval of, my camp counselor, right? Or my aunt who I really look up to, right? Then you get in these situations in the world, you go, what would my aunt do right now? How can I behave in a way that if my aunt saw me do this, right, she would nod her head and approve and go, give me the thumbs up, right? So these are the kind of questions, but they're more evolved questions. But what they do start to do is they start to take this just, well, I do it because it's what everybody does. And it starts to make it something that's much more driven from the inside because this is who I am and this is what I decide matters to me.
Right.
So then, right, when you get the criticism, you go, well, you're not one of those people whose opinion matters to me.
Yeah.
Right.
Geez.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. So it's really getting them to be intentional and make these conscious decisions,
right,
instead of reacting.
Absolutely.
Awesome. So what are, what's one of the biggest things that you see people coming to you with, like in the past month? Right now, as we're recording, we're still dealing with the COVID pandemic and all of that. So I'm sure there's stuff directly related to that. Is there anything that is, specifically related to that or a little more universal?
Yeah. So, I mean, I have had 3 or 4 families, like new families I started working with just in the last 2 weeks. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
even in the midst of, the world in turmoil. And the trend with all of them is I have a son who is a teenager who is not getting schoolwork done, is like losing motivation and is kind of adrift, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And it is, I would say, the most common thing that I'm hearing both from new families and also, my current families that I work with is just, it's so hard to be sitting at home doing the schoolwork, doing the busy work, um, you know, putting enough effort in to get passing grades on it or whatever. Like it's really, really hard. And the corollary to that is missing school for the social reasons. Just it's so hard to not have like people to have lunch with and whatever. And so the deeper piece of it is that these are, a lot of kids, we've raised them in a way that they depend very heavily on the outside world to be a certain way, makes a lot of decisions for them. What class to go to at what time you have to be awake, what practice to go to, that stuff is just decisions are made for them. And when all of a sudden the external structure is gone and they're just like, I don't know. And, it's really hard, right? So, the work I'm doing is helping to develop the internal structure inside themselves, to be able to just organize their time and be disciplined about it. But that's the most current kind of thing. I would say that, the other conversation I'm having a lot of is just ones who are like high school seniors. It's not just the disappointment of the school year ending and all that, but without graduation or without their spring sports season, there's a lot of that. It's really sad for them. But the uncertainty about what the future holds.
Mm-hmm.
What will it, like here in California, the California state schools are not opening in the fall.
Oh, really? I
Yeah,
didn't
and I
realize
think
that.
it's probably just the beginning wave.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all this stuff where they've put all this time in their life and all the grades and the
Yeah.
test scores and the AP classes and the college applications and the stress, and now I can't even go, meet my roommate, and go to the
Right.
first party and that stuff, right? And I have a number of college seniors who I'm working with who are really disoriented, like
Mm-hmm.
thought I was going to be getting a job, but that company has just furloughed all these people, and looks like I'm going to be moving back home and stuff. So they're having having a really hard time. A lot of hard time with this stuff. So what I find is that parents who are lowering the emphasis on grades and raising the emphasis on just general well-being,
Mm-hmm.
much more harmonious home life, and the kids are more stable, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's not that they're not still having frustration with the kids who aren't getting the homework done, because the school's not that compassionate, but they're not seeing, kids not able to sleep at night and, having
Right. Yeah.
freakouts and all that stuff. The parents who are obsessed about, still worrying about the grades and, that stuff, bringing that tension into the home,
Mm-hmm.
they're having a harder time,
Yeah, what I have seen, my kids are younger, but just with my own life and with, looking at my own life and with my kids, it seems like, and especially in a situation like this where who knows what's going to happen with grades, who knows what's going to happen with college and things like that. There's more, it's more important, the relationship with learning and the relationship with work just seems so much more important than the actual grades and the actual performance, so that when they get to college and out into the world, they have this positive association with those things, um and they have that self motivation, that self drive. um what kinds of things have you been helping, like how have you been helping these kids to navigate this right now and gain that sense of certainty and groundedness where there's just so much unknown right now?
Well, again, we're talking about people who have not really evolved into adulthood yet. So there's a lot of, the insecurity questions that are in there is like, is there something wrong with me?
Right.
You
Yeah.
know, the question for the parents is, should I be concerned? And if so, how concerned should I be? Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so that gets transferred to the kids. Like, should I be concerned? How concerned should I be? Right. So just around this school thing. I mean, the most common conversation I'm having around school thing is you need to know you're only like the 14th person I've had this conversation with in the last 5 days.
Mm-hmm.
I know kids who are straight A students going to Ivy League schools who are struggling right now. A college student didn't even hand in one of his final papers on time in his senior semester, and was super, beating himself up only to find out that another girl in his class didn't do it either. And the professor just said, you guys aren't the only two, just get it to me by Thursday. So it's just perspective. It's just understanding, like, it's a really hard time. And it's, don't think that this failing right now to get this stuff in on time is somehow evidence that your whole life is going to be a failure. It's just not. It's just a hard time right now, right? And I focus a great deal on just well-being, right? So, we look at things like, food, clothing, shelter, and there are people out there for whom that is a real, real hour-to-hour concern right now, right? And let's say, though, you don't, you have a roof over your head, there's food in the pantry and that stuff, right? So fundamentally, you should be able to just like take a breath and, okay, at least we're going to make it through this week, right? It doesn't mean there aren't also these other human needs. And you don't think of them as human needs because your life is, again, externally set up so that they're met, right? So the human needs that are just critical, these are things that, without them, humans begin to unravel, mentally, physically. They are movement, right? Mm-hmm. Humans are constantly moving. I'm sure if you and I were to watch the video back of us, and I turn my camera off so I don't even see myself with it, but I'm probably constantly gesturing and moving. People move. That's what we do, right? And we follow a circadian rhythm. We're awake during the day, we sleep at night. It's like, these are things that are essential. If you too much of not doing that, you pay a price for it,
Right.
So you have to make sure you're up during the day. You have to do things that are physical. The number two thing is we are social. We have to socially interact. We have to socially engage. And I understand, I say this to a lot of kids, like, I understand going for a walk with mom is not your preferred social engagement, okay? But if you have the choice to spend the entire day sitting in your room watching YouTube, or spend an hour going on a walk with mom, and then spend the rest of the day, do the hour walk with mom, right? And I have boys I speak to who are spending lots of time playing video games and telling me at this point, I actually just had another boy yesterday say this to me, at this point, I'm so bored with the video games. Literally the only reason I do this is because I talk to my friends on it.
Because they do the social gaming.
Do the social gaming,
yeah.
Right? But you have to be socializing. And then the third thing is remaining intellectually engaged. Mm-hmm. We're curious. This is why human brains have evolved. The primate brain got to the point where it was basically comfortable sitting on a branch eating a banana, right? Mm-hmm. But humans wanted to figure out, how we could build something that, would grow even taller, and you have to continue to feed your brain. So I'm spending a lot of time with my clients right now, really helping them come up with what are things that you want to be learning, what are things you want to be, skills you want to be acquiring, things you want to be working on, that if nothing else at the end of this time, you can look back and say, well, I taught myself to play guitar. Yeah. I learned how to speak Russian, and it's interesting because when I put their brain there, they start coming up with things like, oh yeah, I've always wanted to do this. Well, that's what you got to be doing.
Yeah.
And by the way, it's a lot easier to get motivated to teach yourself to play guitar because you want to play it than it is to do your pre-calc.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, it must be so much more enriching to have something that they want to do versus I can only imagine how the schoolwork right now, where everybody's doing it remotely, must be so unfulfilling. I mean, it's just like you said, it's just busy work, and to have suddenly something where they want to do it, to give themselves that break from that unfulfilling, that busy work, and then and it really shows them that there are unlimited opportunities. Like when you can just like jog your brain a little bit and figure out, what do I want to do? And then you can go do that, creating something out of nothing. I can see how, in the beginning you were talking about there's this scarcity of opportunity, or this mindset of scarcity of opportunity. I can see how through conversations like this, that all of a sudden it's like, oh, that's something, and oh, that's something. And then all of a sudden there's this whole world of opportunities just within, with the mind.
Right.
So that's
I
beautiful.
mean, I've got some of the kids I work with who've started online businesses.
Yeah.
I've got, one guy who wanted to learn boxing, and because he can't go to the boxing gym, he just watched the videos and just got out and started doing these, intense training sessions that he does.
It's
Uh,
awesome.
yeah, it's it's just you start to feel human again. This is the comment I
Hmm.
keep saying. It's like you start to feel alive again. You feel this
Yeah.
alive, you feel your humanness. Um, but and I talk about being an entertainment consumer. It's like we all have our moments where we just hit the end of the day or whatever, and I want to zone out and be entertained for a little while or something. But if you're going to be involved around entertainment, be a content creator, not a content consumer. Like
Mm.
figure out how to make a funny video, figure out how to, produce something or whatever. Learn how to do the software. Like teach yourself skills with this stuff, right? And the people who are doing these kinds of things are just overall healthier and happier right
Hmm.
now. Not that anyone's truly happy out there in the midst of this stuff, but they're
Right,
doing
right.
far better, right? So
Yeah. Yeah, that's so good to hear. And there's so many resources right now as well. I just see people coming out of the woodworks with things for kids. I just signed my 9-year-old up for acting classes online
mhm.
that they're going to start pretty soon. So I'm excited about that. So Jeff, what if you could give one piece of advice to parents of teens right now, what would that be? Something to kind of wrap up what we just talked about and lead us into how to get a hold of you and things like that.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, the right now, because you put the right now in there, I'm going to answer the
Hmm.
right now, and then I'm going to give the first answer that came to my mind. But I want to
Sure.
honor the question that you asked. To me, the right now is focus on their overall well-being. It's far more important than their academic
Hmm.
progress. You can always learn this stuff later on down the road. Khan
Yeah.
Academy can teach you algebra or whatever, but the well-being, there's a price that children will pay if they are too deeply traumatized by what's gone on,
Hmm.
if their life is too out of sync with what's healthy and good for them. And you really
Hmm.
have to spend a lot more time, checking in and
Hmm.
just trying to like bring some joy into your home, and a lot less stressing about the things that you thought were really important and actually never were that important. So
Yeah.
um, save that for another conversation. But the larger thing that I say is that look, Sarah, my niche, who I work with, is I work with kids who are generally bright, more sensitive, deeper feeling, deeper thinking
Hmm.
kids. That's who I work with. You know, the ones who are just kind of happy go lucky and shrug their shoulders, and I'm gonna just go off to college and get a job working in whatever bank, whatever. They're not particularly interested in me. But the ones who think a lot, feel things deeply, they're seeking to have more meaningful careers, deeper relationships with people. That's the ones who I work with. I really get them, and I know how to help them. And what I would say to parents is that there is, no fault of our own, so many opinions out there, so many people who consider themselves experts, that often as a parent we forget to trust ourselves.
Yeah.
And I always say this, that you don't have to become an expert in parenting, right? Leave that to people who study personality types and all that stuff. You only have to become an expert in your own child.
Hmm.
Like your daughter, you signed up for an acting class, right? Not a boxing class,
Right, right.
And it's like you just have to know who your kid is. That's how
Hmm.
you start to figure out, well, what's the right camp to send them to? What's the right, you know, support to bring them, or helpers in their life, whatever it is, right? So I say to parents, it's like trust yourself and trust your gut. just because somebody with a bunch of degrees comes along and says, whatever, if your gut is telling you, nah, it's fine, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just because everybody else is signing up for this soccer league, you know, and your son wants to do the rock climbing team, let him do the rock climbing team. He's going to be okay.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, don't be an expert in parenting, just be an expert in your own kid.
I love that. Yeah, there's so much depth to your own kid as it is.
Yeah.
So beautiful. Thank you so much, Jeff. This was really helpful. I think this is, just the perfect message at the perfect time for everybody who's watching and listening today. We talked on a lot of different things, and the overall being, like you said, trust yourself um, and trust kind of what I got from what you were saying is trust your kid and trust the process
Mhm.
and know that they're going to be okay. And it's not just about the grades at this point, it's about the big picture and it's about the wellness. And this is setting them up for a lifetime of wellness and happiness.
It's like I was saying, this everyone on their own time.
Yeah, yeah,
As soon as you start going, well, but by 14 they should be doing this, and by 17 they should be doing this, and this, it's just not how it is. You
yeah,
know, yes, you pay attention to those things, but you also, pay attention to the fact they're on their own journey. It's one of my saving graces for myself as a parent is I have this saying every time I'm about to want to pull my hair out, which is they're all on their own journey, and I just play a role
exactly.
in it.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah. The other thing that you said, Sarah, is just about how if people were interested in what I do,
Hmm.
I just when you began this, you were telling people I've worked in all these different countries. I really do. 2/3 of my clients are not local to me. I work with teens and young adults all over the world, mostly at this point in the U.S. and in Europe. Um, so people can just reach out to me if they go, I think, it might be interesting for my son or daughter to reach you. If you could put my website, Evolution Mentoring, out
Oh
there.
yeah,
There's a
absolutely.
quick sign up form on there. It's really simple. I have a newsletter you can sign up for. It goes out every week or so. I'm starting to offer free calls for parents, just group calls. People can come in and I'll walk through some scenarios and stuff like that. But I do work with people all over the country, and it's really simple. Reach out to me if it's the right fit. It's pretty magical how it works. So
Beautiful. Thank you so much. And I think, by the end of this, people will have a sense of like, yeah, I really think that Jeff can help me with this, especially where you've described the types of kids that
yeah,
you work with. So we'll definitely put that link in the comments
well,
or
thank you.
in the description. And thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in today. If you have any questions for Jeff, reach out to him, or you can post questions in the comments and let us know what is your biggest takeaway today, and how do you feel like you can apply this to your own kids. So we look forward to hearing from you, and thank you so much, Jeff, again for
Awesome. Thank
being
you,
on the
Sarah.
show today. All right, have a wonderful day.